Welcome back to the Points special lecture series on social issues. And in this video on the topic of gender equality, we'll be dealing with the second part of the gender issues in India. Let us have a look at the problem of domestic violence and its manifestations, the various legislations in the further parts of the series. In the previous videos, we have taken a look at how the patriarchal system manifests itself in the form of domestic violence. There is cultural dominance of men, oppression of women, oppression of the elderly, and there is a predominant male identification whenever there are decision making mechanisms identified in our society. So we can witness a trend where you can actually notice the domestic violence as a trend being institutionalized through the customs of dowry. Now, what exactly do you understand by this dowry? It is a very common phenomenon in the Indian subcontinent. It's nothing but a payment of cash or some kind of gift given to the bridegroom's family along with the bride. So this dowry system is thought to put great financial burden on the bride's family. In the event that the bride's family is not in a position to pay the promised amount, often it leads to harassment of females. But if we go back into ancient history, historical records suggest that dowry is not so significant in ancient India. Why, you might consider? Because daughters had inheritance rights. So even after the parent's death or father's death, daughter had equal rights to inherit the property in ancient times. Therefore, there was no practice of dowry. So as the time passed, dowry has become a prevalent practice in India's medieval and modern era, and it has taken a very perverse form even in the 21st century. So this dowry deaths has been a phenomenon that has been very predominant in the post-independent India, and these are the deaths of young women who are murdered or driven to suicide by continuous harassment or torture by husbands and also the in-laws. What is the reason? To extort an increased dowry. So the greed for dowry money, which is sort of an easy money, did not subside, and this trend has been in rise across the country, across all forms of society and all communities. So this is a universal phenomenon in 20th century India, and to an extent in 21st century also. So this dowry death actually is considered as one of the many categories of violence against women. You also have rape, you also have bride burning, where there were incidents in rural India where the bride was burned to death because she was not in a position to pay the dowry. Also, eve teasing is another form of violence against women. We also have the phenomenon of acid attacks, where acid attacks on women in a very inhuman way led to damage of several lives as well. So when we're talking about this concept of dowry, you have to understand that it is not unique to India. You can find this phenomenon elsewhere in the world as well. The entire subcontinent, irrespective of the fact that they follow different religions, the common theme is this concept of dowry. But if you take into consideration the number of deaths, India reports the highest total number of dowry deaths. And which state? Uttar Pradesh. So this can be important for preliminary exam. And this trend is exhibited even after a decade also. This is an old data, an old infographic, but even till date, if you just update yourself before the exam, just go to the NCRB site, the National Crime Record Bureau, and search for the latest stats at the time of exam. So you will get the latest trends. So one more important feature that we have to note, a conceptual feature, this can also be an MCQ question. Dowry deaths in India are limited to Hindus. Is this true or false? It is false. You can find this across every religion. So, what are the effects of this dowry system? Obviously, it leads to increased incidence of domestic violence. So, even in the pandemic, we've had IMF's chief reminding the world that women are facing the brunt of this lockdown and there is a silent pandemic. When you hear the term silent pandemic, it refers to domestic violence and particularly in South Asia. So the second manifestation of this ill effect of dowry system is the continuously decreasing sex ratio. Because of this dowry, girl child is seen as a burden to the family, financial burden, and that is the reason we have had female infanticide problem as well. You can root this problem to the concept of dowry. There were increased incidents of mental disorders, and especially among middle-aged women. Please remember this point. The next point is something that is related to children, not directly the women. It is said that women have potential to change families and sometimes even nations. Why is that? If a woman is empowered, she can take care of her children very well. She can educate her child and ensure that they have a proper childhood and personality development. But if the very atmosphere of women and her residence is so vulnerable that she herself feels very threatened, such an environment is not conducive for development of children. So that is the reason why a lot of women continue to suffer in silence just to ensure that the child is not traumatized. Now, another factor that is responsible for the lack of safety of women is migration. Often in the 21st century, women are moving out of their native place in search of work. The reason is low employment opportunities in their local areas. So this phenomenon was actually termed as feminization of migration, wherein you see higher percentage of women among voluntary migrants. Voluntary migrants means there are people who are forced to go out of their place, probably, like, say for example, a natural disaster has struck them, or you can take the example of Rohingyas who are forced to displace from that area, fearing persecution by the majority of that society, the Buddhists. Now women are now increasingly taking more challenging roles in economy, and therefore they are more likely to migrate to take up jobs rather than to join male family members as dependents. There is also a need to increase our incomes to give our kids, the next generation, a proper education and schooling. So this phenomenon has been termed as the feminization of migration. But if you take a look at the Western world, this phenomenon is more observed in industrialized countries. So women from less industrial areas migrate to these industrialized countries in search of better employment, yet they are exploited. Let us examine why. So if you take a look at the latest trends in the migration of women, they are leaving their families behind and migration of single women happens. And because of this reason, they are most of the times very vulnerable because they don't have a proper engagement with the employee. Most of the works they find are contract based. They can be hired or fired anytime. So there is no security of tenure. So worker families are prevented from permanently settling. That is also one problem. Women are continuously on the move for employment, which is a very peculiar situation because most of the times they are not with the family. And this phenomenon is even more interesting because women are migrating alone. Now, what can be the reason for this migration? These reasons can be categorized as push factors and pull factors. What are the factors that are pushing them out of the place that they are in? Persecution, violence, and war. We've already discussed this in the example of Rohingyas, the Muslims in Myanmar who were forced to move out of the Rakhine state. Rakhine state. We can take them as an example. The Rohingya Muslims of Myanmar. Another reason is poor wages and lack of jobs. If you take the Bimaru states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, etc., they have very poor wages. There is a huge population, there is huge competition for the available jobs. That is why they are always on search for better jobs. And when we're talking about agricultural societies, crop failure, famine, pollution, and natural disaster. For example, you can take the case of Kerala cyclones. What if Kerala floods? I mean, in 2018, we have had the Kerala floods. What if a family lost everything in that Kerala flood? They will have to move out of that place. If a farmer's family faces a crop failure and he is in a debt, he will have to definitely face the issue of indebtedness. Therefore, in search of employment, he would be forced out of that place, and similarly in the case of famine as well. So, this last point, limited opportunities, is somewhere linked to the second point which we have discussed. So, family separation is one reason, lack of services, that is, the ancillary services that are required to keep your job running, they are not available. Say for example, if you are into manufacturing sector, if you don't have a proper transport sector to take your produce out of that area, then it would lead to lower employment, and therefore you can't employ a lot of people. So the employees in that manufacturing sector will obviously want to move out of that place to cities in search of better livelihoods. So these are the push factors. Now let us have a look at the pull factors. What are these pull factors? Safety and stability, freedom, because when you feel you are safe, you can carry out your economic activities very peacefully. That is one reason. Higher wages and job prospects, just the opposite of what we have talked about in the push factors. Food availability and better environment. Yes, obviously, if you are in a clean and better environment, you would migrate to that place rather than stay back in a very polluted environment. And the most important reason, the most important social reason for migration these days is family reunification. If one of the family member is staying back in a rural area, and if the husband or the woman has a better job in urban area, they might want to relocate to an urban area for better quality of life and availability of services. It's very natural. So that can also be a pull factor. So in your MCQs, depending on the question, you have to understand the meaning of the push and pull factors. Push means all the factors that pushes you out of that place. Pull means all the factors that attract you to a place. There can be other reasons as well. Growth of population leads to competition, so there will be less jobs. Then you have unbalanced growth. For example, southern parts of the country are generally considered to be richer than the northern parts. So there is a regional divide, and within a particular state, there will be certain places which are better developed. So that is also one reason for uh, migration. For example, if you take the case of Maharashtra, you have the richer Marathwada region, and the other one is Vidarbha region. Vidarbha is relatively poorer than the mainland like Maharashtra, Pune, etc., the western part of Maharashtra, which is very industrialized. So there will be migration within the state from this Vidarbha region towards Mumbai in search of better livelihood. Also, birth rate and death rates will also determine the number of people who are living and dying. That will also influence human migration. For example, Japan is actually aging. That is the reason why it is attracting a lot of talent, young people from across the world. It is giving them a permanent residence to ensure that the economy keeps on running. So increase of population leads to increase of labor, and when you have a surplus labor, it is difficult to give them employment in the rural areas. They will be forced to migrate to urban areas. Even in this aspect of migration, which is a social phenomenon, there are some peculiar challenges faced by women migrants. Firstly, more often than men, they are denied full incorporation. What does this term mean? Generally, when we're talking about the rights of citizens, especially when a particular migrant moves out from his domestic country to a foreign country, like say for example, if a person from India is moving to US, he would move on a visa, and upon fulfillment of certain conditions after a few years, he would be given a green card. Upon getting this green card, he would be entitled to certain civil rights, political rights, and certain social security benefits. In such a state, the person is deemed to be incorporated by the country. That is, the full civil, political, and social rights and responsibilities that normally come with membership in a particular country or a particular society. So, women are found to be denied such opportunities in comparison with men. Frequently, you see that there is a stereotypical behavior by the society when we're talking about female occupations. Now, we have discussed this example even in the previous video, like, say, for example, receptionist. This receptionist job is generally given to females because it is considered a feminine job. And then you also have certain jobs which are reserved only for men because those kind of jobs are believed to be the jobs that men should handle. Like say if it involves moving around from place to place, which involves sales, marketing, etc., most of the times you see men who would be involved in this door to door marketing. And also we have discussed that in most of the societies there is a hierarchy. Even in the Indian society we have a patriarchal society where this patriarchy is visible in the form of a hierarchy. We are living in a joint family, for example, and the eldest member will have more power than younger ones. And again, this eldest criteria will be divided in men and women. So older women will have more power in that particular family than a younger one. So this is one of the major reason after the 1991 globalization, liberalization and privatization, LPG reforms as they're commonly called, Indian society witnessed a fragmentation. So joint families became nuclear families. One of the major reason is because women got more employment opportunities. But along with those opportunities, because of the issue of migration, they also face these issues. If you take a look at the news recently, this example of nurses being abducted in Iraq, it's a classic example where women do not feel safe. There is a very unsafe environment, and one of the major reason why you will find that unsafe environment is because most of the migration that happens from this country, it happens in a very informalized sector. That is, they just go on a tourist visa and they start working there. But only once they realize that they are stuck in a trap, they can't come out of it because of the informal nature of the job, and their visa and other documentation are stuck with the employer. What makes situation even more worse is the situation in the destination countries. So most of these migrants move away from the city into suburbs. The reason is these suburbs are very economical, and since they don't have proper facilities, they coexist with criminals. And in such societies, women obviously would not feel safe, especially when they are alone. And if this migration happens in a setup where multicultural societies are there, there is a possibility that one particular race or one particular culture can be targeted. We have seen this in the case of United States, but we have also seen this in the case of Northeast women facing discrimination within our own country. So this should stop. We all agree that urbanization is the way to go forward if we have to support such a huge population of 140 150 crores in the next few decades. Without urbanization, it is very difficult to create opportunities, and we cannot grow into a peaceful society leaving one half of the population behind us. So the issue here is our failure to fully mainstream gender equality into every aspect of urban planning, whether it is at the legislation state or the policy making or the very idea of economic development. There is something called the glass ceiling. So you can visualize a ceiling which is of glass. So when women want to get promoted, when they look up, everything is visible. But the way upward is actually blocked by a glass, even though it seems like it is in the reach. Because of the discrimination that women face, they don't grow in their career. This is very much understood and visible in a lot of studies. For example, McKinsey has actually studied the average wage growth of women and men, both at lower level, middle level, and even in the higher level. Men are paid more despite having a value system in our country where we say that we have to give equal pay for equal work. This is not just peculiar to our country, this is the case everywhere across the world, and things are changing for the better in the 21st century. But this is the major issue that we face right now. So when women move into such crowded urban spaces, especially when they're forced to come out of their houses because of push factors of migration, so they will again be pushed into urban spaces where poverty prevails, where there is a lot of overcrowding, where sexual harassment and assault becomes a normal thing in that particular societies. There is absolutely no security of tenure, that is hire and fire. There is a informal nature of economy, that is there is no social security. Normally in a job you can expect certain stability, but in this kind of an informal nature, you never know if you will be fired or if you will be kept in the job. It can be possible that a particular company, after the assignment is done for 6 months, they can directly fire the person. That is absence of security of tenure. Also in urban cities, like say for example Dharavi, which is one of the largest slums in Asia and probably in the world as well, in the times of COVID, we have seen how badly they have suffered because of lack of water and sanitation facilities. Same is the case if women move out into urban spaces. The next one is public transport. Public transport can also be a place of harassment for women if there is no special attention given to the needs of safety. And mostly, the last is the most important one. When migrants move out of their hometowns, they need access to healthcare services. They cannot use government schemes and facilities because they have moved elsewhere. So this is another aspect where women can't access sexual and reproductive health services. As a result, there is a possibility of mismanagement of their reproductive health as well as sexual health, which can lead into long-term issues. So all these problems culminate into a very horrible situation for women, but definitely things are changing because of certain legislations. We will end this video here, and in the further videos we will be discussing about the legislations and the various schemes that the government came up with to empower women so that they can participate in economic activity and social life as well as political life, and make this society much more inclusive than what it is right now. That's it for now. Thank you.